Hello, welcome to another New Jersey Folk Festival virtual artist encounter. We're going to be visiting with Matt Backus, bluegrass musician today. Hi, Matt. How's it going?
Going well, Maria. How's with you?
Pretty good. Yeah, I'm really excited to have you do a little artist encounter with us. And I just wanted to have you introduce yourself a little bit. You're a bluegrass musician, a scholar, a faculty member in the American Studies Department here at Rutgers. So
hmm
how did you get started as a musician and a scholar? Which came first?
Well, as a musician, I guess I started playing guitar when I was about 15, and I didn't play anything other than guitar until I was somewhere close to 40. I think I was about in my late 30s when I came upon a violin. Sort of a family member found it in their basement and sent it to me. Said, "Do you want to use this?" And I said, "Yeah, why not? I'll try to figure it out." And became really fascinated with the violin from that point forward. And more recently, like in the last 5 years or so, I played a lot of mandolin with the band that I kind of front, the bluegrass band that I play with. And yeah, and then the scholarly side of it, along the way, I didn't study music. I'm not trained as a scholar of music, but the interest it started to emerge. I guess maybe 6 or so years ago when I started doing these public lectures through the New Jersey Council of the Humanities that were really fun to do. And so I started kind of poking around, in particular, thinking about fiddle music and what it's about and what its history is, and what the culture of the fiddle is. And so I started to kind of think about that for the the public lectures that I give, but also for some research ideas and research that I've kind of been. This always stays on the back burner, it seems like, but that I really do want to get to one of these days, to just think about more about the sort of scholarly questions of folk instruments, folk music, tradition. I'm really interested in the notion of invented tradition, and I kind of think that that fiddle is right at the center of these kind of ideas about invented tradition, because there are a lot of people out there who really feel very strongly about traditional fiddle music as being the sort of core of some kind of history of some sort of culture, Scots-Irish culture or Appalachian culture and things like that. So that's something I've been giving some thought to.
I'm curious what you think, like if you had to tell the audience what is some of the most interesting things you've learned about the history of the fiddle, what would it be?
Um, I'm interested in how, I guess, how sort of biracial the development of fiddle music was, of old-time fiddle music was, and Appalachian fiddle music. There's certainly, I didn't expect that, for one thing, that fiddle was actually was a more common instrument among African Americans than the banjo was in the 19th century. It's sort of, most people think of the banjo because it was an African instrument in origin, but fiddles became really popular among both enslaved and free blacks in the 18th century, but really in the 19th century. By the time of the Civil War, they were predominant as an instrument. And so that's kind of interesting to me, and to think a little bit about that and some assumptions that people have about fiddle music. Basically, black fiddlers sort of disappeared from the scene almost entirely after the Civil War, and then kind of reemerged in the context of the string bands, the mountain string bands, in the end of the 19th century and early 20th century. And there's been some effort to revive that tradition. There are a couple of string bands out there doing like black string band music, which is very cool, very interesting.
And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your band, the Magnolia Street String Band, which I'm reading here uh, was called by Bluegrass Today. They said it was on the strength of the single album, Magnolia Street String Band has ascended into the upper tier of today's new bluegrass vanguard.
Yeah, that's right.
Which
Straight to the top.
So tell us a little bit about your band.
The band's an incredibly fun thing and a great thing that has developed over a while. We've been together in the current form. I think we've been playing together for almost 5 years, and it's great. I mean, it kind of fell together, it fell into place before before I was really in any kind of position to say that I should have a band. I guess I stumbled into having a band. Um, Basically, a friend of mine and I decided to get together and just sort of jam and play around with some fiddle and some guitar. And then we invited somebody else, and they came along. And for a while, we had a cello player, and it took a very long time before we had anything that looked like a bluegrass band. And initially, we didn't really necessarily think it was going to be a bluegrass band, but bit by bit, some people left. Some people kind of just, it didn't work. It wasn't a good fit, and we brought in other people and ended up with a fairly straight-ahead bluegrass uh, group, a 5-piece with bass and banjo, fiddle slash mandolin, and guitar. Yeah, the band's been great. I mean, we have a couple interested, really, we got great players, amazing players. There's a kind of legendary folk figure in the band, this guy Paul Prestopino, who was, I think, honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award at the last folk festival. He was a backing musician for Peter, Paul, and Mary in the 80s, and played with all kinds of legendary folk players. And so he joined the band as the banjo player. And at first, and then we got a different banjo player in, and Paul shifted over to playing just sort of jack of all trades, because he plays a million instruments. But yeah, it's great. So it's 5 pieces. We do a lot of 3-part harmony. We do pretty traditional, pretty straight ahead kind of bluegrass, but we're not obsessive about it. We're not trying to recreate an exact replica or something. You know, I don't know. We just try to figure it out as we go along. It's always, yeah, it's satisfying music to me. You know, I have my own opinions about bluegrass. Sometimes they're not the same as the rest of the band. I tend to not like it to be too fast or too technical. And there's a lot of bluegrass out there in the world that's very fast and technical. And I think we kind of gravitated toward a more mid-tempo feel, a little bit more relaxed feel. And we're inspired a little bit by the sort of cosmic Americana sound, you know, Grateful Dead and Peter Rowan and things like that, have, for a lot of us, were the way that we got into bluegrass music, actually.
Well, I think you were going to play us a few tunes. So what are you going to start out with? I'm going to just kind of hand it over to you from here.
I was going to start off with some fiddle tunes because I just kind of was in the mood, and it seems like a good way to set the stage. I actually, initially, when you invited me to do this, I thought maybe I would talk mostly about the fiddle and play fiddle tunes. But actually, just because of the quarantine lifestyle, I've ended up really doing a lot of songwriting over the last month or so. And so I thought it'd be interesting if I could play a few songs that I've written really recently, and maybe talk about their connection to bluegrass. Some of them are more bluegrassy than others. Some of them are some of them are really more like country music. You know, I'll play a few of those and talk about how they emerge as bluegrass songs in my mind, or to the extent that they do. But yeah, first I'm gonna just play a few fiddle tunes. They're like old time fiddle tunes. They're kind of, I mean, a good thing about these tunes at a time like this is that they're kind of in some way all evocative of isolation in my mind. You know, the Appalachian kind of landscape, really, and certainly the way it developed in the 18th century is fairly isolated for each small group, to the point where there are almost like little microclimates of music. You know, over one ridge, the music changes or something like that. And also, you know, it's isolation. It just seems like a big theme in this old time fiddle music. Maybe even emotionally, there's a lot of loneliness in it. So I figured I'd play a couple of lonely sounding songs and see how they sound, and then we'll play some singing numbers.
All right. Well, I'm going to sit back and let you take the helm. So take it away, Matt.
All right. This first one's called a brushy fork of something creek. Brushy fork. I don't know. I'll think of it in a second. They say the only way you can tell bluegrass, you can tell fiddle tunes apart is by their name. So if I forget the name, we're in trouble. Brushy fork of, can't remember. It'll come to me. This is a kind of it's got that kind of modal mountain music kind of sound to it, where it's kind of in between a major key and a minor key, and this is true of a lot of this kind of stuff. Um, it's got a lot of bending and kind of bluesiness to it. So Johns Creek is what it is, Brushy Fork of Johns Creek. I knew it would come to me. And yeah, you get that the sense of the kind of minor tonalities in here. You get these slides. They're kind of sliding in between the major scale and the minor scale, essentially, which evokes this sense of instability, I guess, and also this sort of bluesy and sad quality. Some of it is directly influenced by blues musicians. You know, blues musicians that did arrive in Appalachia, you know, a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades after the Civil War, brought some blues ideas to the region. And like Bill Monroe, sort of the father of bluegrass music, learned directly from a blues guitar player a lot about the idea of playing in a bluesy style, and brought that into bluegrass music. So yeah, that's Brushy Fork, Johns Creek. This next one is called Colemans March, and it's a real pretty one. It's kind of an eerie, pretty tune. It's the story behind it is that it's this kind of it's a kind of a old time music trope in a way that there's a fiddler who's been sentenced to hanging or sentenced to death for some crime, and he has the opportunity to play one last tune, you know, as his last request. And inevitably, these are these tunes that have like 16 different parts or something. And the idea is that they came up with all these extra parts to make it last longer. This is sort of true of this one. It's called Coleman's March. And the story goes, Coleman was sentenced to death by hanging for the murder of his wife. And he was being taken across town in an ox cart. And he played this tune, which was a familiar Scots-Irish tune that had been a kind of peppy up-tempo number. And the idea is that he dropped the tempo way down, slowed it way down, and it becomes a very mournful song. It's a march, but it's a sort of death march. Coleman's March. you very kindly. That's Coleman's March. Really a beautiful tune, and yeah, eerie. But the story goes on that Coleman was acquitted of the charges, but after he had already been hanged, somebody else stepped forward and claimed that they had actually done the crime. So his memory, his name was salvaged, but not his life. Coleman's March. Let's see what else I got. Maybe one more fiddle tune, and then we'll get into some singing numbers. This one's called "Shove the Pig's Foot a Little Further into the Fire," which is a very kind of colorful name. I was disappointed, though, to find out that the pig's foot is actually slang for a fire poker. So it's not nearly as good as I thought, but in terms of the name, but the tune's still as good as I thought. It's another kind of modal mountain sounding number. Shove the pig's foot a little further into the fire. Yeah, so those are just kind of old time fiddle tunes. When I play fiddle, most of the time when I play it, I play old time style. I don't play a lot of true bluegrass fiddle, which is a more technical style for sure. I do play the fiddle sometimes with the band, and when I do, it's a kind of hybrid between old time playing and more bluegrass style playing. There are some things that I do that old time players don't generally do. Like I use vibrato. A lot of old time players don't use any vibrato at all, so they play completely flat, without any vibrato at all. And so the way I play is kind of a combination just that I made up, I guess.
Can I ask you a question, Matt?
Mhm.
Can you explain a little bit what the difference is between bluegrass music and old time music, just for some folks who might be watching who don't know the difference?
Yeah, I mean the easiest way to explain bluegrass music comes from old time music, more or less, and basically it's bluegrass is kind of a more polished, usually faster tempo, more virtuosic style of music. The old time music was mostly played on fiddles, and then on fiddles and banjos, sometimes together or sometimes separately. But those are pretty much the instruments, and there really wasn't the kind of larger bands were not part of, like a dance, like a square dance or something, would be played by one or two musicians most of the time. And there were no guitars involved. There were no other rhythm instruments. So the fiddle had to carry the rhythm. So a lot of the stuff that you hear that's very rhythmic, if you hear this kind of, in old time music, you have a lot of really rhythmic stuff like that's kind of like, that kind of rhythmic feel in the bow. A lot of those shuffles and things like that are part of old time music because they had to be essentially the rhythm part and the melody part at the same time. The old saying is a violin is a voice and a fiddle is a drum, right? It's like it's a percussion instrument almost. And so that's one difference is the smaller groups without guitars and stuff. The fiddles had to do all that. But yeah, the other things, yeah, bluegrass. The founders of bluegrass, Bill Monroe, and then later Flatt and Scruggs and other people like that, they sped it up. They made it not necessarily technical, but they made it fast and difficult, you know. And they also just made the whole presentation a lot more showbiz in a way, you know. Bill Monroe and his bluegrass boys had the big hats, perfectly clean, perfect suits, perfectly pressed suits. They stood very straight up. You know, old-time fiddlers often play like, even play in their laps. They'll even play like this. You know, you've probably seen people do this, play down here. Because if you're going to play a square dance for 5 hours, you might not want to stand the whole time. But Monroe's fiddlers would be like straight up and down here. You know, like this. Very straight up and down, always perfectly poised. And yeah, he wanted his bands to be very polished. He didn't want them to be associated with the backwoods. He wanted them to be associated with like a new entertainment form. And so that's part of the difference. And you know, more recently, over the years, one branch of bluegrass music has become very speed oriented and technical. It's almost kind of like, it's just all about virtuosity, really. Or that's one of the main points. Old time music remains this kind of colloquial and very folksy and kind of democratic style music where the audience and the players oftentimes are the boundary is very loose, you know, permeable boundary. You can sort of feel like you're part of it. If you start playing spoons or something, you're in the group, right? Whereas bluegrass music is much more about this is your instrument that you've kind of mastered.
Oh, that's so interesting. I
Yeah.
think it's a distinction that if you're not like deep into the scene of bluegrass or old time, sometimes people don't know. So
Yeah.
it's really helpful to sort of hear an explanation of it that way.
Yeah, and there are other things one could say about but you know, yeah, that's a sort of my take on it, a brief take, I guess. But yeah, it's great. It's very interesting to think about, and yeah, I love both of them, to be honest. And some people don't. Some old time musicians are really, they think bluegrass is all that flashy nonsense, you know. And then bluegrass players always say, oh well, old time players, you know, never stop. They just play the same tune all night long because you can go, it's cyclical. It just goes around and around and around. And there aren't really solos in old time music. It's just the whole group plays and they all play the same melody all at once, which can be mesmerizing and hypnotic and really kind of a beautiful experience. But if you're itching to show off your new licks and things that you figured out, you're out of luck because, you know, there's just no place for them. So.
Well, I think you were itching to show off some of your new licks on the guitar, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I got to play a couple numbers on the guitar. Now, let me grab the guitar and I'll tell
Okay.
you. Yeah, I mean, some of these songs, I guess, I'll make sure, since we're a little short on time, I'll just make sure I get to a couple of ones that are most bluegrassy. I mean, sometimes I sit down and I try to write a song that's bluegrassy because the band, we like to do some originals with the band. And so sometimes when I'm trying to think of a song, I'm like, okay, how can I make this sound like bluegrass? My own musical background is much more like folky, kind of like hippie music, I guess, like Dylan and Neil Young and stuff like that. And so as a songwriter, it's hard for me sometimes to not go right into that pocket, you know, into that kind of sound a little bit in some way. So I tried playing faster tempos, getting some of those more modal, darker, bluegrassy, old time sounds and things like that. And some of them work out as bluegrass songs. Some of them are sort of in, you know, they're somewhere else. The solo album that I'll make someday or something like that. They're just, but in any case, the quarantine got me playing and writing songs, and it's been really fun to do it and to just kind of take this time to play to write a lot of songs. And it turns out it's a great environment for writing songs. So I've written like four or five new songs, more or less. I've collaborated a little bit with my girlfriend. She's been writing some lyrics for me and working back and forth with lyrics. And we've come up with some good tunes, I think, some good numbers. I'm going to play one that's called Canary that's kind of got that that dark kind of mountain feel a little bit. So a lot of as far as like old time music, the old ballads were usually unaccompanied. You usually just sung, just a voice. So then some old time music you hear like a single instrument singing and playing the same melody as the voice is singing. And that's got a very eerie kind of old time sound. Or the banjo would play the same melody as the fiddle was playing. And that kind of unison playing is interesting. It's got that kind of eerie sound. So I developed, I started playing around with this little thing that was kind of where the singing followed along with the guitar, which you wouldn't really often do in rock and roll or folk. Descend each day into a mountain, from dawn to night, down in a hole, and in a cave, a gold canary to be their guide and sentinel. One April day, as they were waiting, the miners felt a breath so cold, and in the mine that early morning, a twist of fate the bird foretold. The latch it rolled, the cage lay open, a rush of wings into the light, and in the hole their eyes were lifted to see the bird in golden flight. There is no moral to my story. There is no truth that it implies. The sky reclaimed the gold canary. The men went down. They did not rise. Thank you. It's a minor song too. I mean, minor key, but also about miners. Yeah, which is like there's nothing more mountain than songs about miners. I've always been kind of like fascinated and like deeply disturbed by the idea of mining in a coal, of working in a coal mine. So working out my own claustrophobia issues there, I guess, in that number. And yeah, what else we got? Yeah, so for other ones that are new, and that are kind of bluegrassy, was one that I wrote a while ago that I just kind of finished up. Maybe I'll do two more if that's good time-wise. Yeah, I'll do two more, and one of them is real new, and one of them is a little older that I just kind of finished up. And the one that's older and that I finished up is definitely in the bluegrass style. It's pretty much based off of a particular player, Jimmy Rogers, who's known as the singing brakeman, and he was one of the kind of figures who actually moved old time music into new directions. One of the things that happened with this kind of in the 1930s and 40s, some vocalists emerged. Hank Williams, the singing cowboys, like Gene Autry and so forth, and also Jimmy Rogers, the singing brakeman, where the focus was on the voice and the singer rather than on the musicians, the instrumentalists. And that changed certainly the trajectory of this kind of music. So Jimmy Rogers is great. I'm a big fan of his music, but he featured a lot of yodeling, mountain yodels, blue yodel, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many he did, and others. And so this is sort of based on that, but with a kind of a South Jersey feel, and because yeah, the landmarks in the song are all South Jersey landmarks. It's from I wrote it shortly after I had moved into Bordentown. I first started writing the tune, I guess, of the song that long ago. So it's been a while in the making, but now I think it's pretty much done. It's called Pineland Blues. Well, since I left that woman, I walked the salt and sand. Since I left that woman, I walked the salt and sand. I'm trying to find a reason to be an honest man. And on the road to Padstow, there were vultures in the sky. On the road to Padstow, there were vultures in the sky. I'm just trying to be free now. Who knows when or where or why? Oh, lady, oh, lady. There's rain on the horizon. It's gonna find my windowsill. The rain on the horizon. Gonna find my windowsill. I'm trying to tell the valleys from the hill. And it's harder than fog iron. It's dark like berry wine. It's harder than fog iron. Well, it's dark like berry wine. And the devil's always on my trail. Headed for the county line. Oh, lady, oh, lady, oh, lady. I'll stand by that red water and watch it flow into the sea. I'll stand by that red water and watch it flow into the sea. I'm gonna let it take these pineland blues far away from me. Oh, lady, oh, lady. Your lady, your lady, your lady. Thank you very much. It's the Pineland Blues. Yeah, so you know it's local, which is good, and this is Folk Fest related. We like the local, the Jerseyana. And yeah, actually, place names are incredibly powerful in songs. Sometimes you just need to name places, and it's a good song. Like there's a great Lucinda Williams song where she's just like, all the way to Jackson, I don't think I'll miss you much. And then she's like, when I get to Lafayette, you know, and this goes through this whole list of names, and you don't really need to do anything more than that sometimes. It just evokes something. Yeah, and this last one that I'll do is really it's the one that's certainly the most topically relevant, I guess. It's really kind of about this moment, and the kind of concept behind it was that springtime. I was kind of walking around in Bordentown looking at these big flowers, these big ridiculously bright, cheerful flowers, when like people are dying all over the place, and this sort of like this pall on the earth, you know. It almost seemed as though there's a sort of mocking quality to it almost. And so I was sort of playing around with the idea of this sort of springtime being something that's in this context kind of I don't know, it's kind of lurid almost and a little bit unnerving in some ways, or at the very least a little bit spoiled by the circumstances, you know. So I guess it doesn't have to be, you can take it as far as you want, but the imagery in the song is meant to be sort of imagery of springtime's kind of more lurid qualities, I guess. And it's called Springtime with a Broken Heart. Birds are singing in a song so fair. Birds are singing a song so fair. Squirrels are squirreling in the fertile air. The earth is breathing and the leaves unfurl. I curse the springtime in a foolish world. It's a sad and sorry sight. Greet the springtime in the dead of night. See a flower blooming in the dark. Face the springtime with broken heart. Creatures stirring down in the mud. Lambs to slaughter, oh, that vernal blood. Supposed to be a shower, feels more like a flood. I'm cracking like an eggshell, I'm trembling like a bud. And it's a sad and sorry sight. Greet the springtime in the dead of night. See a flower blooming in the dark. Meet the springtime with broken heart. Creeks are swollen like crying eyes. The moon leans backward and softly sighs. We keep on turning in the grinding gears. I feel the sting of a heartless spring and a broken year. And it's a sad, what sorry sight. Greet the springtime, the dead of night. Find a flower blooming in the dark. Face the springtime with broken heart. Face the springtime with broken heart. Thank you very much, folks. That's about it for me, I think. I can see it. I can't hear you.
Yeah, here we go. That was great, Matt.
All right. Well, what a pleasure. It was really a lot of fun.
You know, it's I thought that the songs that you chose were just so apropos of, you know, the situation we're all in, the kind of like loneliness and thinking about the places where we're stuck in and living in and sometimes loving and sometimes feeling really oppressed by. Yeah. So, yeah, I wanted to ask you, so you are a professor as well as being a musician, and what will you be teaching in the future?
Oh, wait. Well, I will be teaching a music class at some point, music-themed American Studies class. The next semester, I'm not teaching it. I think it's the semester after I'm scheduled to teach it. So hopefully, everybody will be back to actually meeting in person and you know, that kind of stuff. But so it'll be spring a year from now. I'm going to be teaching a class that's been on the books for a while, but it hasn't been taught in a long time, called Folk Ballad and Folk Song, I think, like something like that. So that'll be one where I'll actually kind of bring instruments in and play and sing, you know, that kind of stuff, which will be fun. Otherwise, I'm teaching popular culture this summer. I'm teaching 19th century fiction in the fall and something else. I can't remember what the other one is. I think I'm maybe teaching popular culture again in the fall, actually, as a summer class, and then in the fall.
And these are all in the American Studies department at Rutgers.
American Studies, yeah. They're all American Studies classes. And yeah, it's great. I love teaching American Studies. It's, you know, even if I'm not haven't thus far directly kind of brought music into it, I do bring music into it by way of analogy all the time, and I kind of make references and things like that. So gradually people figure out that my head is often going toward music when I'm thinking of stuff.
I think one of the great things about the festival is that it really brings the strengths of the scholars at Rutgers and the students into the heart of the festival, and brings together music and art and culture and scholarship. So
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons we're glad to have you be part of the festival, Matt. And where else would you like to direct anyone who's watching to any other places they can find your music or your band?
Oh yeah, well, you can find the band. Our website is a good place to start, which is just www.magnoliastreet.com. So magnoliastreetstringband.com, rather, the whole thing, magnoliastreetstringband.com. And it's also Instagram and Facebook is basically the same, Magnolia Street String Band. Find it there, and you can check it out. And you can stream stuff on Spotify or Apple Music or any of those other streaming services. Our first record, which came out I guess 8 or 9 months ago, sometime in the summer, that's available for streaming, so check that out. You'll find it on Spotify and other places like that. That's it for now. I mean, no gigs to announce because there just aren't any. I mean, maybe this is a gig, so this is nice. Great. It really is great to get out and play. I mean, or to stay home and play. But to have it be a kind of for an audience. I did a Facebook Live thing a few days like a week ago, and it was just incredibly fun to finally play a gig again after we had a really booked out schedule this year, partly because of the release of the record and stuff like that. We were really pushing it, and we got a lot of good gigs, and they all got canceled, except we're still holding out hope for some July and August stuff, but we'll see.
Well, it's great to have you on here, and hopefully we'll get to see you live sometime soon. Thanks so much, Matt.
Thank you so much, Maria.
Yeah, you bet. I'm going to take us out here. See here if I can get myself here. I just wanted to end by thanking the folks at New Jersey Folk Festival for helping us do this. And I also want to thank Middlesex County Office of Arts and History. They are the folks who were able to sponsor this particular artist encounter. So you can join us online at hashtag NJFolkFest on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Come find us at our website, www.njfolkfest.org. Thank you so much. Goodbye.